If you enjoy heartfelt, true-to-life stories, we'd love for you to subscribe and tap the bell. Thanks for being here. Let's get into today's story. I still remember the way my father's face contorted that afternoon, the veins in his forehead bulging, his eyes glassy with rage. One minute, I was sitting quietly at the kitchen table, hands folded, voice steady as I said the words I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. The next minute, he was lunging across the room like a man possessed. All because I refused to pay off my sister's gambling debts. "You selfish brat!" he roared, knocking over a chair as he barreled toward me. The entire kitchen seemed to blur around the edges. My mother, who had been hovering by the sink, flinched but didn't intervene. She never did. My sister, perched smugly on the countertop with her arms crossed, didn't move either. She just watched, as if she were entitled to the show. I stayed seated. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't even look away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was done. He stopped just short of grabbing me, his chest heaving, spittle flying from his mouth as he yelled about family loyalty, and how real children sacrifice for each other. I kept my voice even, my hands still clasped on the table in front of me. "I am not paying for her mistakes," I said, my voice clear and cold. "Not this time." The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't the kind of silence that asked for forgiveness. It was the kind that demanded obedience. And for once, I didn't give it. "You owe us!" my father shouted, his finger stabbing the air between us like a dagger. "After everything we've done for you!" Everything they'd done for me? A bitter laugh rose in my throat, but I swallowed it. What they had done was raise me to be a crutch for my sister, a safety net for every reckless decision she made, a walking ATM expected to foot the bill for her addictions while being told I was too cold whenever I questioned it. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling, but not from fear for me, from fear of the conflict. "Please, just help your sister this one last time," she pleaded. "We're family. Family means sacrifice." Sacrifice. They loved that word. It was their favorite tool, sharpened and ready to be used against me anytime they wanted something. Sacrifice your time. Sacrifice your money. Sacrifice your sanity. And all of it for someone who would never even say thank you before asking for more. I rose from the chair slowly, deliberately. My father's eyes narrowed, his fists clenching at his sides. For a second, I wondered if he was going to hit me. Part of me wished he would. At least then, the violence that had always lived underneath the surface of this family would be undeniable. But he didn't. He just stood there, shaking with anger, powerless for once because I wasn't playing my role anymore. "I have sacrificed enough," I said, staring him dead in the eye. "I will not ruin my life to fix hers." My sister scoffed loudly from her perch, rolling her eyes as if I was the dramatic one. "You always think you're better than us," she sneered. "Just because you got a little lucky." Lucky. That's what they called the years of studying, the sleepless nights, the 2 jobs I juggled just to get through college without drowning in debt. That's what they called the discipline it took to build a stable life, while she blew every paycheck at the casino 2 towns over. I grabbed my coat off the back of the chair, heart pounding but hands steady. My father muttered something under his breath about disowning me, as I moved toward the door. Good. Let him. I had been carrying the weight of their expectations for too long, and for the first time, I realized I could simply set it down and walk away. As I opened the door, the cold winter air hit me like a slap, but it was nothing compared to the chill I left behind in that kitchen. "You'll regret this," my father shouted after me. I didn't look back. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. A final, undeniable ending. Outside, the world was quiet, blanketed in the kind of early evening calm that made everything seem possible. My breath formed little clouds in the air as I walked down the driveway, not even bothering to glance at the house behind me. They could yell, they could threaten, they could try to guilt-trip me all they wanted. It didn't matter anymore. Because I had finally understood something that had taken me far too long to learn. Family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself to the people who are willing to watch you burn so they can stay warm. And I was done burning for them. The first call came an hour after I left. I let it ring. Then the texts started flooding in. First my mother, pleading with long, rambling messages about how I was tearing the family apart. Then my sister, typing in all caps about how I was a heartless *tch, and how blood was supposed to mean something. And then my father, short and sharp. "You're dead to us." I silenced my phone. For years, they had treated me like the emergency button behind glass, there only to be smashed open when they needed saving. And like a fool I had answered every time. Tuition? Covered. Car repairs? Done. Rent shortfalls? Paid. Every time, it was packaged neatly in guilt, family means sacrifice. But now, sitting in my tiny apartment with its second-hand couch and its cracked linoleum floors, I realized something that should have been obvious a long time ago. Sacrifice is not a synonym for surrender. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I peered through the peephole to find my mother standing there, clutching a Tupperware container like it was some kind of peace offering. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, before I finally opened it a crack. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice overly bright. "I thought you might be hungry." I didn't take the food. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice neutral. She hesitated, shifting the container from one hand to the other. "We just need to talk. Just come home. Let's sort this out together." "Bye. Sort this out?" I knew she meant. "Give us your money so we can pretend this never happened." "I'm not paying her debts," I said quietly. Her face crumpled like tissue paper. "You're tearing this family apart," she whispered, voice trembling. I almost laughed. How easily they blamed me for the fire they had started. "I'm not responsible for her choices," I said. "And I'm not sacrificing my future for her mistakes." I closed the door gently. Not slamming it. Not shouting. Just closing it, like ending a chapter. It didn't stop them. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. Aunt Kathy called from 3 states away, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Sweetheart, you don't want to be estranged from your parents, do you? Family is everything." Uncle Rob left a voicemail, gruff and blunt. "You think you're better than us? You're nothing without your family." Even my cousin, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, sent a snarky DM implying that I was too good for the rest of them now. It was a coordinated effort, a full court press of guilt and manipulation. Like a mafia, but instead of guns, they used shame. They kept hammering at the same rotten foundation. Family means sacrifice. Family means obedience. Family means giving until there's nothing left of you, and then giving some more. But this time, their words hit a wall. I spent those nights rereading every message, not to torture myself, but to harden my resolve. I started saving them. Screenshots, voicemails, all of it cataloged neatly into folders. Evidence, just in case they tried anything uglier. I was no longer playing the game on their terms. I went to work like usual. I kept my head down. I paid my bills. I made coffee in the mornings and watered the sad little fern in my kitchen window. Life didn't pause just because my family had declared war. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of those small, stubborn acts, I started building something no one could touch, a life where I was not currency to be spent on someone else's chaos. But the family wasn't done escalating. 2 weeks after the kitchen explosion, I got a letter. It wasn't handwritten. It wasn't an apology. It was a demand. A formal letter, drafted by some two-bit lawyer my father must have hired, stating that as a beneficiary of family resources, their words, I had a moral obligation to assist in repaying the debts. For the betterment of familial unity. I laughed when I read it. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it. The desperation. The sheer entitlement. I didn't ignore the letter, though. No, I did exactly what they never expected. I lawyered up. I scheduled a consultation with a real attorney, one who didn't operate out of a strip mall. She read the letter, raised an eyebrow, and then smiled a small, satisfied smile. "They don't have a leg to stand on," she said. "In fact, if they persist, you could sue them for harassment." It was the first time I had ever felt truly powerful in the face of my family's abuse. I instructed her to send a cease and desist letter. A few days later, the calls stopped. The texts dried up. Even the distant relatives retreated back into their holes. The silence was glorious. But silence from them didn't mean silence inside me. I still heard their words sometimes, echoing in the corners of my mind late at night. "Family means sacrifice. You owe us. You're selfish." It took time to scrape those voices out of my soul. I started therapy. I went to yoga, even though I was terrible at it. I took long walks with no destination. I learned how to cook meals for one without feeling lonely. I saved money. I read books. I smiled at strangers on the subway. Piece by piece, I built a life that wasn't built around being someone else's crutch. I didn't go to Christmas that year. When my mother sent a photo of the empty chair at the table, a passive-aggressive dagger wrapped in tinsel, I didn't reply. When my sister drunkenly FaceTimed me from a casino on New Year's Eve, demanding to know why I hated her, I hung up. I didn't hate her. I just refused to be collateral damage in her self-destruction anymore. By spring, my apartment felt less like a hideout and more like a home. I painted the walls a soft green. I bought a cheap but sturdy desk and finally started writing again, something I hadn't done since high school. I planted flowers on the balcony. I let the sun in. It was the small things that stitched me back together. And every time doubt crept in, every time guilt tried to sink its claws back into me, I repeated one truth like a prayer. Family means sacrifice. They were right about that. But I chose to sacrifice the fantasy of who they wanted me to be for the reality of who I could become. I chose to sacrifice their approval for my own peace. I chose me. And I didn't regret it. Not then. Not now. Not ever. It didn't end with the cease and desist letter. It never does, not with people who think they own you just because you share their blood. For a few months, it was quiet, eerily quiet. No calls. No guilt-tripping texts. No unexpected visitors. Part of me thought maybe they had finally gotten the message. Maybe they had accepted that I wasn't coming back to the life they built on my back. I should have known better. It wasn't acceptance. It was strategy. The trap was laid in a place I never expected, a family dinner. It was my cousin's birthday, a cousin I barely knew, truthfully, but someone close enough that an invitation to a big family gathering didn't seem completely out of the blue. A neutral event, I thought. A chance to show up, stay polite, and leave without stirring the pot. Maybe even a small step toward healing, or at least, toward civility. I was wrong. The restaurant was a mid-tier Italian place on the edge of town, the kind that had fake grapevines hanging from the ceiling and dim lighting that made everyone look a little softer, a little more forgiving. I arrived early, as I always did, scanning the room and finding our reserved table tucked into a corner. Most of the family hadn't arrived yet. Only my parents and my sister sat there, a few seats already filled with coats and purses. They greeted me with plastic smiles. "Glad you could make it," my mother said, voice tight like stretched plastic wrap. "Yeah," my father added, not bothering to mask the sarcasm. "We didn't think you had time for family anymore." I ignored the bait. I hung my jacket on the back of my chair, ordered a water, and waited. More relatives trickled in. Laughter. Chatter. The clink of silverware against plates. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then the waiter approached with a thick folder in hand, not a menu. "Miss," he said, addressing me directly, "your family asked me to bring this to you." The folder landed on the table with a soft thud. Every conversation around me seemed to fade into a dull hum. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a contract, poorly written, but unmistakably clear. It detailed an agreement wherein I would voluntarily assume responsibility for my sister's outstanding gambling debts, citing family unity and emotional compensation as justification. It even had a place for my signature, already marked with a sticky tab. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush. I looked up. Every face at the table was watching me. Some with pity, some with expectation, but most with cold, silent pressure. "You always said you'd do anything for family," my mother said sweetly, as if we were discussing a favor no bigger than borrowing sugar. "It's just a signature," my sister chimed in, twirling her straw in her drink. "You owe us that much." They thought they had cornered me. Public pressure. Social embarrassment. The weight of familial expectation, thick and heavy in the air. I could feel it, like invisible hands trying to shove me down. But what they didn't know, what they would never understand, was that I hadn't spent the past few months just surviving. I had been preparing. I closed the folder, pushed it back across the table, and leaned back in my chair. Calm. Unbothered. "No," I said simply. The table erupted. My father slammed his palm down, rattling the silverware. My mother gasped like I had struck her. My sister swore under her breath. A few distant cousins looked away awkwardly, pretending not to hear. "You ungrateful little..." My father started, but I cut him off. "I'm not signing anything," I said, voice low but firm. "And if you try to coerce me again, I will file harassment charges." The words hung there, heavier than any threat they had ever thrown at me. Because this time, I wasn't bluffing. I pulled out my phone, tapped a few buttons, and placed it face up on the table. Recording. "I've been documenting everything," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Every text. Every call. Every attempt to manipulate me. This dinner? This contract? All of it is recorded. Try me." The blood drained from my mother's face. My sister's mouth snapped shut. Even my father, usually a raging bull in moments like this, leaned back slightly, uncertainty flickering across his features. I stood up, gathering my coat. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. "And the next time you think about trying to trap me, remember, I'm not the scared little kid you used to push around." I walked out without another word. It didn't stop there, of course. The next week, I received an angry email from my father, accusing me of betraying the family and threatening to cut me out of his will. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who advised me to respond only through official channels if necessary. I didn't reply. A few weeks later, my mother sent a long, tear-stained letter about how family sticks together. About how blood is thicker than water. About how they had only ever wanted what was best for me. I didn't reply. My sister posted a series of passive-aggressive rants on social media, painting herself as the victim of a cold, heartless sibling who had abandoned family values. I didn't reply. Instead, I kept building. I moved to a new apartment, bigger, brighter, a place with hardwood floors and a balcony where the sun pooled like liquid gold in the mornings. I enrolled in a professional certification course that I had put off for years because of financial drains from the family. I started investing. I joined a local volunteer group. I made friends who didn't expect anything from me except authenticity. I built a life where I wasn't the family's emergency plan. And every brick I laid, every boundary I reinforced, made it harder and harder for them to reach me. The final blow came 6 months later when I learned, through a distant relative, that my sister had been sued by one of her lenders. With no one left to bail her out, she had to face the consequences herself. Court dates. Garnished wages. Public records. For years I had carried the weight of their bad decisions, believing it was my duty, my cross to bear. And in the end, the sky didn't fall when I stepped away. They just had to learn how to live in the mess they had created without me. Freedom wasn't a sudden, dramatic moment. It was a slow, steady unspooling of chains I had never realized were wrapped so tightly around me. I built my own road, stone by stone, step by painful step. Not the road they had mapped out for me. Not the one paved with guilt and fear and endless sacrifice. Mine. And when I finally looked back, from my new apartment, my new friends, my new life, I realized something so profoundly simple that it almost made me laugh. You can't corner someone who has already walked away. It was almost poetic, the way it all came full circle. In the beginning, they had treated me like a bank, open 24/7, no limits, no questions. Every time they mismanaged, overspent, or self-destructed, they would show up at my doorstep with outstretched hands, cloaked in the familiar rags of guilt and duty. For years I had handed over pieces of myself, thinking it was love. Thinking it was loyalty. Thinking it was the price of being part of something bigger than myself. But the truth was brutal and simple. I wasn't part of a family. I was part of an extraction plan. When I finally cut the cord, it wasn't just me who changed. It was the entire landscape of our so-called family dynamics. Without me absorbing the fallout, the chaos that had once been neatly swept under the rug began to seep into everything. Bills piled up. Lawsuits emerged. Relationships cracked under the pressure that had once been silently transferred onto my back. They hadn't just lost the scapegoat. They had lost their last line of defense. Meanwhile, I flourished. It didn't happen overnight. The first few months were raw, tender, like a scab that hadn't fully formed yet. I questioned myself. I doubted. I mourned the fantasy of the family I wished I had, the one that never existed. But I held the line. Every time the phone buzzed, every time a relative posted some passive-aggressive jab on social media, I reminded myself, I was not responsible for fixing what I did not break. Slowly, the noise died down. In the silence, I found space to breathe. To think. To dream. I got promoted at work, a project management position that I had once thought was out of my league. I enrolled in night classes, learning everything from financial literacy to creative writing. I traveled, even if it was just weekend trips to nearby cities, wandering through museums and eating pastries in parks. I learned to enjoy my own company, to build friendships that weren't transactional, to love without being indebted. One afternoon, nearly a year after that disastrous family dinner, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, sipping coffee and watching the city hum below me. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She lost everything. They're selling the house to cover the debts. Just thought you should know. No signature, but I knew who it was about. My sister. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling nothing. Not triumph. Not pity. Just a kind of detached sadness, the kind you feel when you hear about the death of a celebrity you used to admire but hadn't thought about in years. A life wasted, a warning scrawled in someone else's blood. They lost their bank. And without it, they lost their ability to live beyond their means, to gamble with other people's sacrifices, to patch the holes in their lives with someone else's stability. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down and picked up a pen. I wrote a list, things I had gained. Freedom. Peace. Financial security. Self-respect. A future that belonged to me and no one else. A few weeks later, I made another list, goals for the next year. Save for a house. Adopt a dog. Take a solo trip to Europe. Write a novel, even if no one but me ever read it. I no longer moved through life on autopilot, bracing for the next crisis they would drag me into. I chose my crises now. My adventures. My failures. My victories. When the holidays rolled around, I didn't get an invite to the family gathering. I wasn't surprised. From what little I heard through the grapevine, the gatherings had grown smaller, tighter, more brittle. Without a scapegoat, the fractures were harder to hide. The resentments that had always been there festered in the open. I spent Christmas curled up with a good book and a warm mug of cider, fairy lights twinkling around my living room. I spent New Year's Eve on a rooftop with friends, laughing under a sky that glittered with fireworks. Not once did I wish to be anywhere else. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly. An old friend of the family, someone who had always been kind to me, reached out with an apology. "I didn't realize how much they leaned on you," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I thanked her. But in truth, I didn't need her apology. I had already given myself something far more powerful: permission to heal. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was slow, almost imperceptible at times. It was learning to trust my instincts again. To recognize manipulation not as love, but as control. To set boundaries without guilt gnawing at my insides. To love without losing myself. They tried to corner me. They tried to make me believe that survival meant submission, that love meant sacrifice, that family meant erasure. But I built my own road. And every step forward was a declaration. I am not a bank. I am not a lifeboat. I am not a crutch. I am a person. I am a life. And I am free. One of the most profound lessons I learned from this experience is that loyalty without boundaries is self-destruction. For years, I believed that love meant sacrifice, that family meant obedience, and that my worth was measured by how much of myself I was willing to give away. I believed that saying no was selfish, that prioritizing my own needs was a betrayal, and that it was my responsibility to fix problems I didn't create. But the truth is, love that demands your silence, your sacrifice, your soul, is not love at all. It's control, it's entitlement, and it's a prison disguised as duty. Walking away from my family's toxic expectations taught me that boundaries are not walls built out of anger, they are doors built out of self-respect. Saying no wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. It was a declaration that I deserved peace, dignity, and freedom just as much as anyone else. It taught me that you can love someone and still walk away from them if staying means losing yourself. Another lesson was understanding the difference between guilt and responsibility. For so long, I had carried guilt like a second skin, absorbing every accusation, every disappointment, every failure that wasn't mine to own. But guilt and responsibility are not the same. Guilt is often weaponized by those who refuse to take accountability for their actions. True responsibility is owning your choices, not someone else's chaos. I realized that I was not responsible for my sister's gambling addiction, for my parents' manipulations, or for the crumbling of a family dynamic built on exploitation. The experience also taught me the power of silence. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every insult requires a response. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to walk away in silence, not because you are weak, but because you refuse to waste your strength on battles that are designed to keep you trapped. Silence can be louder than screaming. It can be a final, irrevocable act of reclaiming your power. Financial independence became another critical lesson. Money in toxic family systems is never just money. It's control. It's leverage. It's a leash disguised as a gift. Building my financial stability gave me the ability to make decisions free from the fear of retaliation, abandonment, or manipulation. It allowed me to say no without wondering how I would survive the fallout. Financial independence isn't just about comfort, it's about freedom. It's about dignity. It's about having the power to choose yourself. I also learned the painful but liberating truth that not all relationships are meant to be saved. We grow up believing that family is forever, that blood is thicker than water, that no matter how bad it gets, you stay. But sometimes, the family you are born into is not the family you are meant to build your life around. Sometimes, the people who share your blood are the ones who wound you the deepest. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to mourn the family you wanted and move forward with the family you choose. Healing, I learned, is not linear. There were days when I felt invincible, full of clarity and purpose, and days when grief and doubt wrapped themselves around me like chains. Healing isn't about never feeling pain again, it's about not letting that pain dictate your life. It's about giving yourself grace when you falter and celebrating yourself when you rise. It's about recognizing that healing is a journey, not a destination, and that every step forward is a victory. Most importantly, I learned that choosing myself was not an act of betrayal. It was an act of love, the kind of love I had spent so long giving to everyone but myself. Choosing myself meant building a life that reflected my values, my dreams, my dignity. It meant surrounding myself with people who loved me without conditions, without invoices disguised as affection. It meant becoming the kind of person I needed when I was younger, someone who knew their worth was not tied to how useful they were to others. The truth is, you don't owe anyone your life simply because they gave you theirs. You don't owe anyone your peace to earn their approval. You don't owe anyone your dreams to keep them comfortable. You are not a villain for walking away from those who would rather break you than change themselves. You are not selfish for choosing a life that doesn't revolve around fixing broken people who refuse to heal. You are not ungrateful for refusing to be an endless resource for people who see your love as a transaction. In the end, they lost a bank. I gained a life. They lost someone who would have moved mountains for them, who would have bled herself dry to keep them afloat. I gained a future where my worth is not measured in dollars or sacrifices, but in laughter, peace, and purpose. I gained the freedom to wake up every day knowing that I am no longer living someone else's narrative. I am writing my own. And if there's one final lesson I would share with anyone standing where I once stood, it is this: you are allowed to outgrow people who refuse to grow. You are allowed to walk away from those who mistake love for control. You are allowed to build a life that is yours and yours alone. You are allowed to be free.